Okay, we are now recording. We are now live. So, another installment, latest episode of the podcast. This is the podcast to end all podcasts. And so, I think I had a conversation. This is Anna, by the way, for whoever doesn't know, probably everyone. I had a conversation with Anna, I think yesterday, and I want to ask Anna if she can explain what she remembers from our conversation about what is this podcast about? What is the goal?
Yeah. I mean, basically, what I got from that conversation is this is just a podcast for different conversations that people don't necessarily talk about, like not really dinner table conversations, right? I think the society we live in, so many topics are labeled as taboo right now that should really be talked about. And it's kind of getting these topics out there and making sure that people really know, what's going on in the world and things that are important. Would you say that that is right?
Yeah. Uh, I would only add like I'm all about power to the people, like I want everyone to be able to have their own conversations personally, because like I know when I was younger and I still am young listening to podcasts, being like, man, I wish I knew how to talk like this to people, and then thinking like, wait, why don't I? Like, why can't I just practice? And so I've
Yeah.
I've started bringing up conversation topics at home with my parents, with family members, and then finding all the areas we disagree in and realizing that it didn't destroy anything in our relationship. It was actually something that helped. So I want
Hmm.
people that listen to this, any discussions that we have, it's like giving them ammunition. Like hearing our talking points might give them ideas of how they could bring things up with family members, friends, people at work. Who knows? Um,
Yeah,
I think we are
absolutely.
outsourcing our conversations, which is not a good thing. Like we're watching other people have conversations as a form of entertainment, which really shouldn't really be a thing
Hmm.
in my opinion. It shouldn't exist. So that's about it. That's the rundown of why I'm doing this.
Yeah,
Um,
I love.
yeah. So now I'll let you introduce yourself. I know you're in a special position right now, a point in your life where you're having unique experiences, and I want everyone to know what they are.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So currently, I'm a senior at Utah State University, but for the time being, I've been out here in Washington, D.C., working as a congressional intern. And this has seriously been my dream come true. This is something that I've wanted to do for years. I finally landed this internship. I work for a congressman from the state of Utah. And so it's been an incredible experience just getting to work for Congress and see everything firsthand and really get to be in the center of all of it.
Yeah. What's been like the highlight, I guess? You said you've been out there for a few months. What's been the highlight of either the job experience or the culture of the city and everything that you're experiencing? What's the best thing?
Honestly, I've loved everything, but I would say the coolest thing for me is to see how different it is being out here and working for Congress versus just reading news all the time and kind of learning what's going on in Congress from the media. That has been so eye-opening for me just being here and seeing how the media just over exaggerates everything to get a story, right? They want to get viewers, they want people to be all up in arms about everything. But actually being here in the center of it all, like there's so much civility, there is so much bipartisanship. Everybody is friendly with each other. It's a really, really cool environment, but the media doesn't talk about that. So I would say that's probably the biggest highlight is just seeing how great it actually is to be here and how much really does get done in government.
Yeah. So that brings me to my first question. Do I vote or do I not vote? What's your stance on that? Does it really matter if I vote?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I've been asked this question before because there's definitely people who are skeptical about it, right? Because, like, for example, in Utah, Utah's a very red state. So let's say you're a Democrat and you're voting Democratic. Some people feel like their votes don't count. Here is my word of advice is always, always vote because I mean, especially for women and for minorities, like people gave their lives, people gave up, so many things that were important to them for the privilege to vote in this country. And it is such a privilege to be able to vote and to be able to voice your opinion. I mean, that's what democracy is, right? So even if you don't feel like your vote necessarily counts, trust me that it does, because we're getting to a point where a lot of different districts in the United States are shifting. We've seen this in, South Texas, where a district that was historically Democratic for over a century just barely flipped red when, Republicans thought they would never have a chance there. But it's because they kept voting and they kept pushing those ideas and they kept moving forward with it. So even if it doesn't make a short-term difference to vote for something in, a district where you don't feel represented, in the long term, it's always going to be worth
Mm-hmm. So I just have so many questions right now, but I'll start with the first one
it.
of, um, well, I guess so. How would you say? I feel personally that social media has come to the point where it influences the outcome of elections almost. Not because not everyone is on their phones, but a decent percentage is. And so because the perception of like that social media influence, people are changing their opinions. Like I feel like someone's opinion could almost flip flop like quickly because of a video they see or exposure to something they didn't know about. So like Joe Biden is being slandered right now in the on TikTok, on everywhere. Um
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't know. What would you recommend outside of social media as a way of forming your views and opinions about politics? What would you recommend? What sources?
I'm so glad you asked this question because this is something that I'm so passionate about. I think social media can be used for good or it can be used for bad. And I think a lot of times it's used for bad. I think that there are so many people. I mean, social media is just a place where anybody can throw out any opinion without any kind of backing for it, without any kind of evidence. And a lot of people on social media just read headlines. And I feel like that is one of the biggest issues. They don't actually do the research, they don't take the time to look into what's actually happening. They just read the headline and immediately form an opinion off of that. But I feel like that's kind of part of our nature, right? I even find myself doing that sometimes until I take a step back and say, whoa, I need to actually go read and do my research on, what this actually means rather than just getting hooked in by a headline. Because again, the purpose for media is to get views, it's to get people excited about what they're listening to, right? Nobody wants to read a headline that says, or an article that its headline says,
Like nothing has
everybody in
changed.
Congress,
Today is the same as yesterday. Like and tomorrow's
yeah,
gonna be the
like
same.
everyone's getting along, everything's fine here. Like no one's gonna want to read that, right?
Yeah.
It's always highlighting problems, it's always pinning people against each other, it's always highlighting controversial things. And I would say that social media has had such a negative effect on elections. And people aren't looking into candidates' policies necessarily. They're just looking at, oh, this is what the headline said, or this is what they said one line in an interview that I saw out of a clip of a video that didn't show the full context, right? So I definitely think that we live in a generation where people are just kind of like unmotivated to learn about that, maybe a little bit lazy and don't want to take the time to do the research, but it's so important to do that and it's so important to stay up to date.
Yeah. So I agree with that last sentiment, especially of like people don't feel motivated to research into whatever, because I think it's the same as like people reading the Bible. Like what percentage of Americans have ever read the Bible all the way through? I'm not one of them. So uh
Right.
when it comes to maybe the Constitution or bills and things, what's your best strategy for getting those first of all getting your hands on those, like finding the source documents, reading them, and what's your best way of deciphering the information? Because I remember I looked up a bill, I don't remember what it was about, and
Mhm.
within the first page I was like, man, I can't read this, like this is just too I don't know, too legislative, I don't know. It's like it wasn't so clearly worded and concise. Like I had to like really rack my brain to be like, what is it actually saying? So what would
Yeah,
you recommend?
really focus.
How would you help, yeah, to focus, how would you help someone like me to learn about bills, have a background in the Constitution and all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am also opinionated about this. First off, with the Constitution, Bill of Rights, all of these, historical documents can be found with a Google search and they're pretty quick reads. Um, I mean, if you just take the time to really look through all of the rights that we have constitutionally, it's so important just to have that base of knowledge, I guess, moving forward in politics or as you do your research, just knowing like, hey, this is what the Constitution states. Um, and everything in this country law-wise is based off of constitutionality. So it's really, really good to kind of have that background. But I would say in the context of like texts of bills, I definitely struggle to read those sometimes because of the language. I mean, they're written by lawyers, right? Who have way
They're
better
shifty.
vocabulary than most of us. Yeah.
Sometimes they don't want you to know what they're saying.
No, and that's the other thing that I have found working for Congress is there are so many bills that the headlines, or I guess the title of the bill says one thing, but the text of the bill says something completely different. And so then when, some representatives vote down the bill or vote for the bill, they get so much slack on the media because they say, so and so voted down this bill and only highlight the name. They don't highlight what was in the bill when there was good reason to vote that bill down. You know what I mean? And so reading the text of the bill is actually so important because reading the title isn't going to give you the information that you need most of the time. There's a lot of things that are hidden in bills that you will not get from the title. And usually those things are kind of worded a little more tricky just to make it harder to find. But if you really look at the bill and what the bill is trying to do, you can usually, kind of interpret it or kind of figure it out. If you can't figure it out, there's always people out there who have figured it out, who are better at interpreting those. And so you can kind of go to those sources and really figure out, okay, what does this bill contain? Why is it controversial, or why does it do what it does?
So what are some of those sources you would mention? Like people, I believe they call them political commentators, but like, who are some? What are some sources you would recommend of people who interpret and communicate the meaning of bills?
That's a great question. I would say anybody with a background in law is going to know that type of language, but also a lot of politicians deal with this type of language in bills all the time, and they're going to know exactly what they mean. But the politicians are the one voting on these bills, right? Members of Congress are the ones voting on them. So they need to know what the bill entails and the text of the bill. So going to, you know, the member of Congress as a reference, or even their staff, because the staff are also required to know what's in the bill when the member of Congress votes for or against it. Those are going to be your best sources because there's people who actually like are required to know what this bill entails and what it means exactly. So those are the best sources. Don't go to social media. Don't go to one of your friends and say, "Hey, what do you think this means?" Because no, it's not going to be right.
So you would recommend like calling an office of like of one of your representatives or something like that. You would recommend actually calling and talking to a representative. I don't know what to call them. I don't know what the name is, but yeah, a person like
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
a person who works in the
representative.
office.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it's not going to be the representative who answers the phone, right? But I think it's perfectly reasonable to call into the office and ask about that and just asking for help interpreting the language or kind of what's going on with that. The people in the office don't know how the representatives are going to vote, so it doesn't help to ask, how is so and so going to vote on this? Because as staff, we never know till after the fact. It's just, that's the representative's decision ultimately. But yeah, I would say the staff are really good resources, people with backgrounds in law, just people who like don't have a partisan sense of view, or I don't know. Does that make sense? People who are really going to
They're
look at that
very
bill and like,
objective. They're very objective.
yes, that's the word I was looking for.
Okay. And you can look that up online, like what number to call, what office to call. How would you do that?
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking from my experience, every single member of Congress has their own website. So if you Google that member's website, most likely you'd want to call the member that you're part of the district of. And then, like, if you scroll down to the bottom of the website, it usually has like an address and a phone number and the contact information. You can always send an email, you can give them a phone call. As long as it's during business hours, they'll answer the phone. So, yeah, I would say that's probably the best bet.
Okay, so for everyone out there who's uneducated, you can go get educated. I just had a question. You don't like tell me at any point if you don't feel comfortable answering like your personal whatever, but in terms of the
Yeah.
last election, was it rigged or was it not rigged? In your opinion, your professional opinion.
In my professional opinion, that's a tough question because I have a lot of friends on both sides who are always in my ear telling me different things. But my personal opinion comes from what I think and isn't influenced by anything else. I would say that obviously there's evidence of election fraud that happened. I don't think it was enough election fraud to say that the election was necessarily rigged. I definitely think that we need to crack down on the election system and make it safer. We need more voter ID laws. We need to make sure that like we are really, really running a tight ship with these elections as it gets more controversial, and as people are, not having as good of intentions. But I think that the result of the election is what it is. I don't think it helps to fight back. Um, we can try again in a couple of years and hopefully we'll win at that point. But I just think I don't understand why it's so controversial, I guess, even though a lot of my good friends are on that side where they do believe that the election was rigged. Personally, it is what it is.
So I personally don't care either about what may or may not have happened. It's like what happened is what happened. But I was on my mission at the time, and I heard from undisclosed sources close to the situation. I'm just kidding. I don't know anyone, but people were telling me that like overnight in some areas that hundreds of thousands of votes were counted, like, and there were discrepancies like such, and I don't know. In my opinion, if the election was rigged, then that means every election in the modern era has been rigged. If that's the case, like in my opinion, but if it's still secure, then it has been secure. Like whatever's been going on has been going on. If that makes sense, there's continuity. So like, um, if this election was rigged, then it's already been rigged. And at that point, what do I do to change that? Nothing, right? So I think it's more like you said, it's a practical mindset is to be like, okay, this is what happened, and so now I have to decide what I'm going to do about it. We can't go back and change it. So,
Right. Yeah, I
um,
think it's all mentality and mindset. If you choose to be angry about it, you're gonna be angry about it and not have good feelings about it. If you choose to let it go, you can have hope in the next couple of years that maybe it won't end up that way again.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So, I wanted to move on to a rather interesting topic that I don't think you're prepared for, but it's like now that you've educated me, I hope to educate you. And so,
Yeah.
a lot of people, there are some, you know what a conspiracy theory is, right?
Yes.
So a conspiracy theory is termed as such because it's like people come together to conspires to come together to do something, and people create these theories. And the name conspiracy theory incites or like insinuates that people are doing it with a purpose in mind of something not good. Does that make sense? Like they're conspiring to influence a narrative. Um,
Yeah.
so some things get labeled as conspiracy theories, which are just alternative theories, and vice versa. Like some people want to push like, oh, it's just like an idea, but really it's a indoctrination of some kind of principle. So you don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm gonna say now. Secret societies in the world history. This is a topic where people might think it's like it's baloney. Some people really like will die on this hill that there are secret societies that influence everything that happens on a macro level, including government, including sports, including media, including everything. um I have a biblical concept I want to talk to you about because I'm not going to go into any of that because I don't know. And so what I do know is
Uh-huh.
is scriptures. There's this uh there's this reference made to Babylon many times in the scriptures. And if for anyone who's not aware, Babylon is referred to as the world religion. It's like it's the enemy of God's religion, is the world's religion, the world's views, the world's concepts. And it's symbolized with Babylon. And Babylon was a real kingdom. It was existed in the Old Testament. um Babylon even captured Jerusalem and Israel and all these things. And anyways, one thing I've personally discovered that most people don't know about, I want to bring awareness to, is Babylon is actually originated from Babel, which I like to call it Babel now because it sounds like Babylon. It's like all these cities like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and all these cities. The name and the culture, like it changed the culture changed the name as the culture evolved. So it went from like Bethel to Bethlehem, Salem, Jerusalem, and there's probably a million other examples. And one of those is Babel to Babylon. And that's something that most people don't really realize, is that Babylon comes from the same place where the people were originally cursed by God for doing what? For building a tower. Most people probably haven't considered this either, because it seems like people don't talk about this or teach this in school, but pyramids have been constructed across they're dotting the planet. There's literally thousands and thousands on every single continent. There are thousands of pyramids, and we only mention the ones in Egypt. And it's like, I'm going to make this connection really quick, but the notion is this: why did all these pyramids suddenly happen to be constructed by so many different civilizations, but also in the same way, where a lot of them are aligned with constellations? They're constructed mathematically, like if they didn't calculate them correctly, the whole thing would fall over, it would crumble. And they're like situated at an angle with the equator in a lot of instances. And where did they learn this from? So this is something that people might not have connected, but it's possible that the origins of all these pyramids came from one point, which is Babel or Babel, however you want to call it, where the people were building a tower, right? What kind of tower would they build if they were like primitive, or like not? They didn't have like the cranes that we use to build skyscrapers. A pyramid. So a pyramid is also on the dollar bill. It's like there's a lot of cultural influence from the ancient world into the new world that we kind of tend to forget about because of social media perception of our reality being altered. We even forget how life was 200 years ago, forget 10,000 years ago how it was. So anyways, that was a long wind up. All I wanted to say is that Babylon from Babel was a huge amount of time, and it's connected. uh is it fair to say that like the world religion continues onward, but it's like it's manifested in our culture today? And that's like what everyone should be thinking about. um and before anyone gets too bored, I want to mention one last thing. In the Book of Mormon, in the scriptures, it mentions plain and precious truths that have been lost from the Bible, or from the current, like the gospel that we have. Things that were mentioned in the Book of Mormon that were not mentioned in the Bible, and it doesn't say what specifically. And one thing is the secret societies, that it says explicitly that Satan has inspired men, and probably women too, since the beginning of time to covet the blessings of the righteous, to steal from, and to basically to oppress the children of God. Where is that mentioned in the Bible? And it's I don't really see much. There's kingdoms that try and oppress Israel, but like no mention of like a secret underground organization. Does that make sense? It seems
Mhm.
as if that has been obscured in the Bible, because if it was so important that the Book of Mormon makes specific mention to like the Gadianton robbers and all these things, they make it clear. They go out of their way to emphasize this point of like Satan inspiring people to organize and to band together to oppress God's children. Now we see today people are starting to catch on, like, wait, there's some shady, shifty things going on in like in society. Not maybe not politically, but um the Jeffrey Epstein case, that was a huge one that people kind of, it came in and out of our
Yeah.
peripheral. We're like, wow, that's crazy. And then it didn't go the way that we wanted to, and we kind of forgot about it.
Yeah.
So the fact that people are doing these things and it's seemingly under our noses kind of insinuates that the same exact thing that has always happened is still happening, where Satan is inspiring people to do things and try and control the environment to try and oppress children of God. That's a long, long, long explanation, but I wanted to say, do you see any correlation with that and our current society today? And what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. And this is something that I actually have studied, which I think is so interesting. Here is my personal belief. I believe that the Bible is true as long as it was translated correctly. We know for a fact that it probably isn't, because it was translated by multiple people, they kind of just threw whatever they felt like throwing into there sometimes. I think some of the information in the Bible is the same information that the original Bible had. But I think that it's been through so many people's hands that not all the information in there is necessarily true or necessarily included that used to be. I completely believe that the Book of Mormon is true. I think everything in the Book of Mormon is pure and was translated correctly, and no one has been able to change that. So I absolutely think there's a correlation there with how things were back then versus our society right now. I would say definitely we're seeing a war on religion right now, societally, and a war on people who believe in God and want to bring other people to God, I guess. And this is something that the scriptures actually prophesied of, that this would happen in the latter days, which we're living in right now, that a lot of negative influence would come upon us as children of God, right? As we're trying to do the right thing, Satan gets a little bit more powerful and has more of an influence on people. And it's tough because, there's two really strong sides going against each other. But I definitely think that, I mean, I would even say in politics. I mean, I don't know too much because I'm just an intern, but I would say even in politics, like religion is being oppressed. And I think that the separation of church and state is very important, but I know that religion influences a lot in the world currently, and I think that we need to acknowledge that while still recognizing the separation of church and state. But, for example, there was a Supreme Court case just a few weeks ago about a football coach who knelt with his players to pray before a football game on the field, and someone brought it to the courts because they said this was unconstitutional, and they said that there needs to be a separation of church and state. He should not have been able to pray with his students. And that kind of breaks my heart that that was even brought up to the courts. This coach is a God-loving man. He's praying with his team. Like, how down to earth is that? I think that's amazing, and I think more people need to be actually praising that and saying, yes, like, bring religion back. Like, it's okay to talk to God. It's okay to talk about God. Like, there doesn't have to be this stark separation. And I think, like, even just the fact that that was brought to the Supreme Court, so that there's definitely a war on religion right now.
Amen. A few thoughts I had, like from what you said, is like the oppression is not passive, it's active. And so we tend to have this mindset, I guess, as peaceable people, that like uh life is good, and for the most part life is how it should be. But it's hard to get into that mindset of actively seeking ways to make, like, to outwardly impact your environment. We are more content with our personal lives being like, how can I become better as an individual? And then we don't often get outside of ourselves to be like, how can I change everything in my surrounding, like with my friends, family, or anyways.
Yeah,
It's like we tend to sit in this shell when our enemies, the oppressors, are actively impacting our lives and we're not actively responding. So I feel
right.
like it's at a point where now we have to decide to not sit back anymore, but to look at, obviously we can't change the outcome of elections. But I mentioned all this about the underground, the satanic influence in our society, because it's real and it needs to be acknowledged. But the only thing, and we've already discussed this, the only thing that can be done is you making your own personal choice. You can't, like, looking at what happened in the past doesn't change what happened in the past. You have your
Yeah.
own personal sphere of influence, and you need to decide what to do about that specifically. So,
Yeah.
um, I did have the next question, the next topic about our young people, the youth,
Uh-huh.
and if you could speak to the youth of America right now, when it comes to personal development, we talked about how social media has impacted, mostly to the negative, our perception of reality. Our choices, our decisions and everything are influenced by a false perception of reality. What would you suggest to young people, how can they counteract this? And if we're like a God fearing and God loving people and we want the world to be better, what are those small steps that youth need to take to prepare to become leaders in the future?
That is such a great question. One thing that I would say to the young people of America is it's okay to be yourself and it's okay to voice your opinion. The only person you can control is yourself. And this is something that took me a while to learn because I mean, I feel like I have a very outspoken personality. I have a very strong personality, and a lot of times that translates over as me wanting to control situations or control how people act or what they do. And it's taken me a long time to realize that the only person I can control is myself. I can't control how anybody else is going to react. I think the young people of today are so, I can't think of the right word for it. People get offended so easily now. And that didn't
Sensitive.
used to be the case. Yeah. I mean, and being sensitive is not a bad thing, but I think just
A
people take
balance is
offense
needed.
so easily. Yeah. And I think what people don't realize is that being offended is a choice you make. And obviously, if someone goes about things with bad intentions and is trying to hurt you, it's valid to feel hurt, right? But I think when someone is expressing their opinion to you, if you choose to be offended by that, the blame is only on you for choosing to be offended by that. And I think so many young people today don't understand that concept. And they think that they are automatically in the right if they're offended by something and don't want to consider the other view, don't want to consider the fact, hey, maybe they're right about some things that I'm not necessarily right about. And that's definitely something I've had to learn as well, right? I'm so opinionated, but I still have to take a step back and choose not to get offended when people express opinions to me that I don't agree with, and say, you know what, this person has had different experiences than me. They've lived a different life than me. Maybe they know a little bit better than me about some things. And I think our generation is so prideful. We're so caught up in ourselves and thinking that we're right and thinking that we deserve all the praise, all the attention, and
Yeah.
it's in reality, that's not how the world works. And I think it's a really dangerous mentality to get into. It's a victim mentality of anyone does me wrong or anyone says something that I don't agree with, I'm automatically the
Cut them
victim,
off.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how is that okay?
Not.
Like it creates such a divide between people, and it creates contention, and it creates all of this unnecessary drama in our society that could be so easily fixed if people just were humble and chose not to get offended and chose to see other people in a positive light and to assume the best of people until proven otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a biblical principle of putting other people before yourself. It's love thy neighbor. And
Yeah.
I've noticed that when you assume the best of people and you assume that other people are, you could even assume that they're probably better people than you because you don't know what choices they're making. When you live that way, instead of assuming that other people are like not the same as you or less, it totally changes everything. Your life goes from
Yeah.
positive to negative, or vice versa, negative to positive. Um, I guess I wanted to say one thing too is that I feel like a lot of people, the common term right now is NPC on TikTok, of like the non-playable character, the person that's just there in the video game you can't interact with them really. People are saying that like that a lot of people are robotic these days, and I agree with that sentiment that a lot of people have been programmed in a way to they think things and say things only because that's what was programmed into them, not because they programmed it themselves. Um,
Yeah.
the reason why I think people get so offended when you speak your mind is because they're used to listening to an authoritative voice that's not their own. And so, whether that be the social media or even Satan's influence in your ear whispering lies, when you don't have your own opinion and you hear someone speak like as if they know what they're saying or what they believe passionately about something, they're like, "Are you trying to program me?" Because that's what they're used to. They're being programmed constantly. So when you meet someone who is as equally cemented in their own beliefs as you actually don't have such an explosive dialogue. It's more like you find out where you disagree and kind of agree to disagree or figure out
Yeah.
some kind of different
And
form of
it's a
communication.
respectful conversation.
Hmm.
Like you both go about it with dignity, and there's no like ill feeling toward each other. Like I've had so many conversations like that. And it's like night and day from people who are like more insecure and get offended easily and go about it from like a victim mentality versus people who are very strong in their mindset and know their standards, know who they are, know what they believe. Um, and those people are so much easier to talk to, even if we completely disagree about literally everything. It is such a respectful conversation because we both understand each other. And we both understand, like, hey, I know that you believe what you believe for a reason. You've had those experiences. Good for you. Keep doing you. Keep standing up for that.
Yeah. It's like the people that vehemently disagree are the ones that are most insecure about not knowing things for themselves. Um,
Right.
and that's what's called a programmed response, is that when that nerve gets touched, you spew the first thing that you've been told to say. And then the thing is this: if you can get all those programmed responses out, you have to figure out what's my last, like, if I don't know what to say, then like at that point where all my program responses are run out, then what do I actually think?
Well,
Like
then they go
at
for
that
your
point,
character.
yeah, then they don't have anything else to say. So
Yeah.
um it's important too to flip the script and realize, like, I have been that person and maybe still am that person in some way, where I have programmed responses in my head that I didn't put
Mhm.
there. So it's
Yeah.
time for everyone to go fishing and to pull those out and to replace, like, in the ecosystem, in the environment of your consciousness, to put in your own thoughts and take out the ones that were programmed into you. And at which point you'll probably be a lot happier, a lot you'll have a greater understanding of life in general, because um when you build something yourself or you fix something yourself, it changes everything versus when someone else does it for you.
Right.
That's my perspective, I guess. So
Yeah.
we have 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. I'm gonna see if we didn't cover everything. I mean, there's a few things that we missed out on, but career path. If you could say one thing about career path, you have 2 minutes to say. When it comes to young people, not most, I'd say 90% of kids in college do not know what they want to do. Even when they graduate, they don't know what they want to do with their degree. What would you say
Yeah.
is some advice about that?
What I've actually seen from college students who are in that kind of predicament is, I mean, a lot of them, especially some of my guy friends, they're so worried about going into a career where they're going to make a lot of money rather than doing something that they love or something that they're passionate about. And that's kind of where they run into this wall where they're like, well, I don't know what I want to do after graduation, because if I do something that's not going to make enough money, I might not be able to provide for a family. And like, granted, those are valid concerns, you know. But I would say for those students, like, really figure out what you love. And if you don't know what you love, go try different things. Go do internships. Go do a job shadowing. Go, meet people for coffee and go sit down with them and go talk about, like, what they do in their career and what that entails, and if they feel like you'd be a good fit. Like, there's so many options out there, and there are so many people who are willing to connect with you and to help you get into the right career. So I would say don't worry about money. Don't worry about, like, not having anywhere to go. Just go with your gut, because you know yourself better than anybody else knows you. You know what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. So go with that. Go get experience. Go talk to people. Put yourself out there. It's uncomfortable, but you have to do it to be successful in any kind of job.
Yeah, that's a good. This is the point I'm going to end on. We have probably 30 seconds left. Is you have to get over yourself and realize that your goals don't care about your insecurities. Your goals don't care about your problems in life. Your goals are your goals, and they're objective. They're not personable. They're only there if you go after them and get them. So you have to really get over yourself, and you have to do things for what's right and not for what feels like what you feel like doing doesn't really matter. Doesn't apply. It's like
Yeah,
do what's best for you, what's right for you. So yeah. But anyway, Anna, thank
absolutely.
you so much. I don't know how much time we have left. I think less than 10 seconds, but
That's
uh,
okay. Yeah.
thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. I hope people listening, I hope you guys learned a lot because she's very smart. So
Thank you, Christian.
yeah, so I'm gonna end the call now, but